Hello, everyone, and welcome to a segment episode of Black Op Radio live from Waikiki. For those who tuned in, we had some interruption of our web provider, our internet service, and that is no surprise because our show is so cutting edge. The man's trying to keep me down. But anyway, we are joined today. We have author Wesley Swearingen.
Swearingen.
Right, ex-FBI, and we're going to talk about his book. We've interviewed him before, but for those not familiar, we want to do what we can. And also we have Dr. Mark de Valk from England, and he has his PhD in film practice from the Oxford Brookes University in the UK. Mark's currently the new editor of Dealey Plaza Echo magazine, which is put out from the UK research group. And actually here, just want you to pass me a copy of that. The Dealey Plaza Echo, and we'll discuss that in a bit. Just hold it up to the light. So this is what we're doing today. We're going to talk about the Dealey Plaza Echo, about the UK research group after. But for the first hour right now, we'll spend time with Wes. And so welcome, Wes, to the show.
Thank you.
And thanks for coming to Waikiki. This is excellent that we're here in the warm, beautiful weather.
Oh, I love it here.
And we're doing an outdoor show. What a great place to have an interview from. Diamond Head in the background. Okay, and so let's just get into briefly from the beginning. For those not familiar with your book, just give me a brief synopsis of what made you write the book, and we'll talk about the details in a moment then.
Well, I was in the FBI for 25 years, from 1951 to 1977, and I wrote a book first time because I saw corruption, which I couldn't tolerate after being in the FBI 20 years, and so I wrote my first book, which was called FBI Secrets and Agents Expose. And I was afraid to write this book because I knew there were certain people who were still alive, and I felt that if I said anything, they would probably kill me, and it was more important that I stayed alive than it was for me to try to write a book to convince people that believe in the Warren Commission that Lee Harvey Oswald was the lone assassin. So I've been criticized for waiting so long, but if I had told you back in 1962, for instance...
you might have to hang on a second here.
Probably Magnum PI flying over. You
Sure.
would not have
Go
believed
ahead.
me. You would not have believed me if I had told you in 1962 that the CIA and the Mafia were planning to kill the president. And
Or some plot that is not a lone assassin.
right. And the only reason that I believed the man who was telling me in 1962 was that he had told me several months before that about the Bay of Pigs and the CIA being involved, and that time I didn't believe him. And he spoke to me for about an hour, and he was saying that the CIA had airplanes and ships, and they had so much ammunition.
Right, and where was this?
This was in Chicago, Illinois.
Right.
I was working the Cuban counterintelligence at the time, and I was the only agent working it, and so the Cuban who wanted to tell his story spoke to me, and the first time the story about the Bay of Pigs was so outrageous that after about an hour I finally said, you know, I don't know why you're telling me all this nonsense, but I can't spend my time listening to a goofy story like this. Right. Well, as it turned out, it was true. Yeah, right. So in 1962, he called me again, and I wanted to apologize to him, so we met and we talked in a car. And the reason I wanted to talk to him was because the first story about the Bay of Pigs came true. He said, well, I have another story I want to tell you now. And he said the CIA and the Mafia are planning to kill the President of the United States. And I had just lit a cigarette, and I had a mouthful of smoke, and I almost choked on it. I said, Ramon, can you at least wait until I exhale? So he told me this fantastic story of the CIA training Mafia members how to kill someone. And I said, it should be the other way around. They should be training the CIA, because the Mafia has been doing this for years and years and years. I said, I don't think they need any training. He said, what the CIA wants to do is make it look like one person. They don't want it to look like a mob hit. Otherwise, you can have the Mafia go out there, and if Kennedy's assassinated and the mob is involved, everyone will know it. So he continued to tell me the story, and I kept taking notes, and everything he told me seemed to be true, with the exception he told me about the CIA having a secret training camp in Florida, and I said, no, that's illegal. That can't be true. He said, they have it, believe me. I said, well, okay, I'm not going to sit here and argue about it. So he went on and on and on. He's naming people, and he's naming FBI informants, and I'm thinking, I don't know whether I just should open up the car door and say goodbye or just listen and hope that it never happens.
But from his previous story sounding incredulous, you felt inclined to listen and continue because, who knows, there may be a grain of truth in what he's telling you this time.
Well, yes, if I had not heard the first story about the Bay of Pigs, which came true, if the first time he had ever talked to me was about the CIA killing the president, I would have just laughed him out of the car, because that's such a nonsense thing that it's unbelievable.
Right.
And when I tried to tell my superiors, I went back to the office and I said, hey, guess what, the CIA is planning to kill the president of the United States. And they looked at me like, maybe you need a Section 8 discharge, which is a psycho discharge, from the military. And I said, I know it sounds crazy, but he swears it's true. And he told me about the Bay of Pigs, and that came true. And so I said, I have to believe it.
Was that when you were in Chicago, Wes?
Yes, that was in 1962.
62. And did you have to file an official report on that? Did you actually write that down and sign off on it?
I did file a report. It was what we called 62-0. It had nothing to do with the year. We have case classifications like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and at some point miscellaneous was 62. So if you had something that didn't involve, say, a bank robbery or a Communist Party or kidnapping or extortion, and you didn't want to throw it in a wastebasket, and you wanted to keep it, then you put in what they called a 62-0. Well, we didn't have a file for presidential assassinations because we did not investigate them. It was not a violation of law, so we didn't have a classification.
So where was that filed, Wes? Do you know where it was filed?
Well, it would have been filed in the Chicago office under 62-0 dash, and then whatever chronological
sequential order numbering system that you were
number
utilizing
came in. If an agent had a 62-0 the day before, it might have been 2,560, and mine would have been 2,561, and the next day 62 and 3 and 4.
Yeah. Did you keep a notebook on that? Did you actually jot down the file number anywhere?
I kept
Is there
a
any record of
notebook
it?
for a long time, but finally got to the point that I couldn't read it.
Right. It would have been the archives. Is there an archives of those field reports or anything like that? Would it be potentially anywhere that researchers could look for?
Normally, that kind of an archive would have been destroyed after a certain number of years because the FBI had a routine. They destroyed file records because space was a premium. And back in those days, everything went on a piece of paper.
But at that, I'm just wondering, because it was so close to 63, November 63, likely at that time the paper would have been still there, and then it would have become of some importance after. Would that, that might be something that might keep, wouldn't it?
It's possible, but I don't want to give people the impression that because they can't find what I wrote, that there's some sort of a conspiracy to hide it.
Okay.
Because there was a routine, I forget what classification it was, of, say, 15 years, certain files were just automatically destroyed.
Yeah. Did any other FBI agent have to... Did any other FBI agent have to sign off on that report? Like, did it countersign or received it? I'm just wondering if anybody could potentially corroborate
No other
the
agent
document.
signed off on it. Normally, we have two agents on an interview if it's important, and so then you'd have two names at the bottom and two initials when it comes through. You read what they call the FD 302 interview report form, and you read it for typographical errors and for content, and if both agents approve, they initial it and it goes into a file. Now, in this case, no one believed me, and it wasn't a 302 form because we didn't really have an investigation going, so I wrote a memo. Now, I did talk to some of the agents who were on the top hoodlum squad in Chicago, agents that I had worked with on the security squads and with whom I had done illegal break-ins, so I knew the agents fairly well. And one of the agents, by the name of Bill Romer, was working the Top Hood program, and I went to him. I said, "You'll never believe what Cuban just told me about the CIA and the Chicago mob." And I told him. He said, "You're right. I wouldn't believe it. I'm not going to believe it."
I'm just wondering, Wes, post November 22nd, 63, did any Secret Service or other Dallas field office agents, FBI agents, come to interview you about any of this information in the time period before the Warren Commission released their report?
No. There were no interviews by the FBI because when Kennedy was assassinated and then Oswald was killed, Hoover put out the word that he didn't want anyone to say that anyone else was involved or anyone assisted. Oswald was the lone assassin. That's it. End of story.
No Secret Service came to interview you or speak to you on that?
At that point, the Secret Service would not have known because, as far as I know, it did not get outside the FBI. So they would not have a reason to talk to me. And of course, if the CIA knew, then I wouldn't be sitting here talking to you today. At least I'm pretty sure I would not.
Were you knowledgeable of any FBI Dallas field agents? Were you friendly with any? Did you speak to them in course of work or post?
No, I knew two Dallas field agents who I had worked with in other offices, and they were transferred to Dallas, but I never spoke to them, with the exception of one. When Kennedy was assassinated and I was in Louisville headquarters, and that day, the next day, I called one of them on the telephone, and he said, "I can't talk to you because the word is out that Hoover is telling Shanklin, who was the agent in charge, that this is the way it's going to be." And so he said, "Call me back on Monday because it's a nut house down here right now."
Yeah.
And I understand you were in some kind of training, and you expected that maybe a lot of you guys would be going to Dallas to help out, and then just nothing happened?
Yes, it just so happened that I had gone to
Was it Louisville then, you said?
I went to what they called in-service training. After an agent becomes an agent, then a certain number of years you go back for retraining, and they call it in-service. It's 2 weeks of in-service. And I went back, and normally there are 40 agents in the class. So as I remember, there were 40 agents. 40. And we had just returned from Quantico to headquarters, and we'd gone to lunch. We came back from lunch, and Mark Felt, who was then in the inspection division, I think he was number 1 in the inspection division, came in and said, President Kennedy has just been shot. I'm going to release you early. You can take your bags, go to the airport, and go on home. Well, as Mark Felt, who's now known as
Deep Throat.
Deep Throat.
Yeah, Deep Throat.
Yeah. He went out the front door, and I went out the back door. And because my name is toward the end of the alphabet, I was always near the last row. So I went out, and I said, Mr. Felt, when I was in Chicago, I heard about the possibility of CIA and the FBI plot.
Yes, plot.
And he probably thought, this agent is nuts. Anyway, he said, you go back to your home office and we'll take care of it. And I said, but there are 40 agents here. Bags are packed. We can be there in probably 2 or 3 hours. No. He said, we'll handle it. And I said, well, okay. Well, I've been on what they call special assignments, and I know how they operate. Now, when there is such an important case in a field office, and the field office agents cannot handle it, then they call agents in from different field offices, maybe 1 or 2 from New York and 1 or 2 from Dallas and so on. And you might have 20 or 30 agents on the special. And theoretically, the agents on the special are supposed to work just that special.
Yeah.
But that doesn't always happen. Anyway, I knew what would happen, and being Friday, that meant that Mark Felt would have to get in touch with agents in charge in different field offices and say, I want you to send 1 or 2 men to Dallas on a special. And the routine is that the agents who are going on a special for 2 or 3 weeks, they dictate reports or memos on all their files so that everything is up to date. And then they go home and they pack the bag and they say goodbye to the kids and goodbye to mama. And they end up maybe Monday or Tuesday.
Right. So by having 40 people already almost packed
could've
and
been
ready
there.
to go, right? Yeah. Yeah.
I was just wondering, Wes, do you recall the name of that you were just going to tell us the name of the FBI field agent from Dallas who was going to said to call you back on the Monday or something? Do you recall his name?
Yeah, I remember his name, but I don't know. He's probably still alive, and I'm not
okay.
supposed to mention.
All right. Did he? Okay, that's fair enough. Did he give you any information or thoughts about what was happening in Dallas? I mean, out of your own personal curiosity, were you interested to? Was he saying, "Oh yeah, we're looking at this or not looking at that"? I mean, was there anything that caught you out of the ordinary in the conversation you had?
The impression I got from him was that Oswald was an informant.
Sure, I think that's
Now, the FBI has different levels of informant.
Yes. Yeah.
And if they want to deny that someone is an informant, then if someone who is a potential criminal informant, PCI, the FBI will say, well, he's not an informant.
Right.
Now, if someone like Richard Kane in Chicago, who was working with the CIA, has a symbol number and documentation and a file in Chicago or in any city, and then in Washington, D.C., that's the FBI cannot deny that.
Yeah. Did you ever come across, Wes, any cases that where you where an individual had or two individuals were using the same identification or number of individuals for any kind of operation or FBI CIA operation where a particular individual, two individuals had the same name, cover name, or did you ever come across that, or did anyone ever suggest that to you in terms of Oswald?
No, because the FBI was very particular in trying to separate files because we had a fantastic index system.
Yeah.
I will have to admit that. And even back before the days of the computer, if you got a phone call from someone and you had a name and you wanted to check, you could probably get an answer within 1 or 2 minutes by calling the chief clerk's office. And the girls who worked the index system were fantastic. We had a 3x5 card, and it was an outstanding system. It was almost as fast as a computer. Not quite, but it was pretty darn good.
Could you actually, one last one, could you actually liaise, did you actually liaise with the CIA and be able to check their card indexes as well?
No. It's interesting that you ask, because when I was in Chicago, a Cuban lady gave me some photographs that her husband had taken of Russian ships in the harbor, and my supervisor wanted me to send the photographs to Washington, D.C. I said, "You got to be out of your mind. These photographs go out of my hand. I don't know where they're going."
That's right, okay.
And I said, "I am going to turn these over to the CIA myself." He said, "Well, we'll have to get Hoover's permission because that's not allowed." And surprise to me, they did give me permission, and I went to the CIA office in Chicago and turned over the photographs. And about a month later, I think it was about a month later, the woman who gave me the photographs called and said her husband had been killed. They caught him and they killed him. Now, I don't know whether CIA was behind it, whether Castro was behind it, who was behind it. I don't want to speculate, but
I think previously the question was just hinting at if there was people impersonating Oswald, would there be other records of that? Because we have heard that someone at a shooting range, at an automobile dealership, people had been coming in and, and almost trying to leave a trail of people who had run into somebody who was this radical guy named Lee Harvey Oswald, or just Lee Oswald, or...
In a normal investigation, I would say yes. But see, this was not normal. And we did not investigate presidential assassinations. And so...
I guess he never had one.
Yeah.
No, we never really had one.
Not for 100 years. Yeah.
Now, if someone had killed an FBI agent, well, we would have been all over that. Yeah. And anyone impersonating anybody, we would have had a record of it. And you might have 10 different people.
Yeah.
If you had impersonations, you'd have 10 different records.
Yeah.
We would have, definitely, and we would have kept those records for I don't know how many years.
Did any of your colleagues in the Dallas field office ever express to you the idea that there were multiple individuals using Oswald identification? Wes, did you ever come across that?
No, because the agent that I spoke to on the telephone gave me the impression that they were not allowed to discuss the case with anybody outside Dallas.
Even their buddies.
Even their buddies.
Yeah.
And
because it was serious.
We all understood that when Hoover gives an order, that you either follow it or you're going to be an ex-agent.
Yeah.
It was that simple.
Yeah,
And at that point, I guess you had no reason to be distrustful. I mean, it's not till years later of the Warren Commission that we kind of get the idea that it was more of a cover-up than a real investigation. And the time you're talking about is the week of the assassination, so...
Well, I knew there was going to be a cover-up as soon as I talked to Mark Valk. When he didn't want to send the 40 newly trained agents from Washington had already packed a bag. They could have been there Friday night.
I'm just wondering, Wes, also, did you hear anything? There's been some discrepancies in terms of the Oswald items that were initially confiscated by Dallas Police Department from his rooming house on 1026 North Beckley, and as well as the Irving home of Ruth Payne when they went in the garage. The FBI took over that. I mean, there was items sent to Washington or the FBI, and then more items actually came back than that were sent. Did you hear anything on that account?
I heard information in the form of rumors, and I joked with several agents when I was in the FBI. It was amazing. I could be in Chicago and something would happen somewhere else in the country, and we would hear it before it was on the news. And the reason that happened is if the three of us worked in Chicago and then you two were transferred somewhere and I'm still in Chicago and you're in Dallas, and buddy, if you could pick up a secure telephone and say, hey Wes, guess what I just heard? Right. And we heard stuff all over the country and even from all over the world. From the legal attaches would call their friends and talk on the telephone, and but say, well, don't tell anybody I told you this, but this is what happened. And it was funny because I wouldn't hear about it over the news until maybe 10 o'clock at night. And somebody's already telling me at 10 o'clock in the morning.
Yeah. I mean, was that something you had heard, that more evidence actually was returned from FBI in Washington back to Dallas Police and the FBI field office than they actually initially sent?
I heard that, but
you didn't hear from anybody in the Dallas office say, oh, we had to...
It may have come from somebody in the Dallas office who then later told me, but being an agent, you don't pass on rumors like that. You don't pick up the newspaper because then Hoover hears about it, you're fired. And so you just kind of pack it away up here and remembered. But I do remember hearing when FBI agents tested the rifle.
Yes.
If I'd been the agent who was testing the rifle, I would have said the same thing. I want to keep my job. And since nobody is going to believe me, they're going to believe Hoover. Hoover said Oswald did it, and I say, well, Oswald couldn't possibly do that rifle in the amount of time he did. So,
or any shooter.
Any shooter. Yeah. I mean, I was pretty good with a rifle in training school. In fact, I had a score of 97 on the rifle, and my score was better than one of the agents who was the state record holder of whatever western state he came from, Idaho or Nevada or Montana, and I had never shot a rifle like that except when I was in the Navy. And you go out to the range and you shoot the rifle, and that's it. You don't use the rifle in the Navy. But here I am out shooting a
you
got
a better
holder.
score than Oswald, then, basically.
So when I heard stories, I knew that they were all make-up to make the story fit. That what Hoover said was that Oswald did it, and okay, Mr. Hoover, whatever you say. We'll all go home at night and rest easy.
But you're implying then, as a gut reaction, just that first chance encounter with Mark Felt, just his reaction to your questioning that do we need help, and he says no, everything's going to be taken care of. You had that impression that, well...
I had that impression from what I was already told in 1962.
Right.
Now, if I had not been told that, and I went up to Mark Felt, and he said, no, you go on home, I would have thought, well, okay, we'll go on home. No big deal. But when you're told a year before that this is what is going to happen, and this is who is behind it, and then it happens, and then Hoover said, no, Oswald is the lone assassin, that's it, case closed, then you begin to realize, man, there really is a cover-up.